So what I thought I'd do was give you a very high-level overview. Let me share my screen and start.
Arko, can you ensure that Nishanth can share the screen?
Yeah, sure.
His host has disabled screen sharing.
Now I believe you can share your screen.
Okay.
Yeah, in the meantime, just to let you know, all of you know that the talk is, we are expecting the talk to kind of finish by 10:40 a.m. UK time here. So probably in the next 31 minutes. And then we have 20 minutes for questions and you can engage with Nishanth. Thanks.
Yeah. So do you see my slides?
Yes, Nishanth.
Okay. And, oh, no, not that. I shouldn't be. I thought I clicked also. Do you still see my slides?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so what I want to talk about is three things, privacy, partisanship, and politics. And these are not things that you normally associate with computer science, but I think what's happening is, if you went back to the 1970s, there were hackers in, let's say, Bell Labs, creating languages like C, creating operating systems like Unix. And then they said, hey, there are things that don't work for us in Unix, so let's build some tools, right? So let's build some tools like, I don't know, the command line, the shell, those kind of very fundamental things. And those were tools that they were building for themselves. Whereas what has happened now is that more and nobody else in the much of the rest of society was not actually aware of or using computers. So what they were doing was scratching an itch that they had and solving problems that they had. But what's happening now more and more since the advent of the internet is that rather than us computer scientists solving problems for ourselves, we are actually ending up addressing problems of society. Okay, so we should, unlike Brian Kernighan and Rob Pike and all those famous pioneers of computer science in places like Bell Labs, and there were others like Dijkstra and Donald Knuth and people like that who, again, were doing more of a theoretical, fundamental research. All of them were less concerned about society than we need to be today. So this is a fundamental shift, I argue, between computer science, the classical computer science, the origins of computer science, and where we are now. And so we should really be thinking about the society and the effect that our work has on society. And in particular, given the buzzword of AI, as Arjuna was saying, so we are in this situation where now we are starting to talk about AI-enabled societies, right? So societies which are augmented by new functionalities that are enabled by AI. So what about privacy? What about partisanship? What about politics? These are things that social scientists would have thought about, but we need to think about it as technologists as well. So what I would argue is that AI is not just an enabler, right? So if you go to all these like Gartner and people like that, they talk about AI enabling society. But what I argue is that in fact, it's not that they are enabling. AI is somehow mediating. So the difference is that when something is an enabler, it's actually aiding society. Whereas if something is mediating, then there is no value judgment there. So there are some things which AI is doing, which is really, really good, things which you could never have done before. But there are also dangers that we need to be aware of. Okay, so let's start with the hype of AI, right? So it started maybe late 90s and early 2000s, where there were games like there was this very famous game that was arranged between Garry Kasparov and IBM Deep Blue, which is a supercomputer which was built specifically to solve the problem of chess. And Kasparov was the world champion at the time. Nobody could beat him. And then he went in very confidently, thinking that he would beat the computer. Ended up that this is a picture that's taken from one of those games that he was at. So you can see he's not very happy with what Deep Blue was doing to him and his game. He lost the game essentially, right? So that was the beginning of the end of human supremacy in games. There are some games, so chess was done, and now computer games are computer-based chess solutions, chess engines are much more advanced than what they were before. So it's a solved problem. But there are other problems like Go. So Go is an ancient Chinese game, which is considered to be much more complex than chess. So even if you go back to the computer science definition of complexity, the O of n of Go is much higher than what it is for chess. And Go was a game where it was thought that there is creativity, there is imagination. You can't really have a computer that can beat the human innovative solutions, creative solutions that humans come up with. And this is Lee Sedol, who was the world champion until very recently. And he's a Korean. Nobody was again able to beat him in Go. We've got a solution now that DeepMind, Google DeepMind developed, which solidly beat Lee Sedol. There's a beautiful documentary called AlphaGo, and it's also available on YouTube, I think, that I'd encourage you to watch just to see how they developed a solution, and they humanized this whole experience, and how AI can actually beat human beings at their own games. So where we are now is that AI beats us everywhere. So there are all sorts of new stories that come up. So there's AI is better than humans at recognizing images. AI does speech recognition. A lot of us have these kind of devices like Alexa or Siri or Google Assistant or whatever. And then, as Arjuna was saying earlier, AI is also starting to do well in very sophisticated domains like doctors. So doctors would have spent like tens of years gaining expertise, training for their super specialties. And then up comes like a machine learning algorithm. You give it a lot of data, a few weeks to crunch through and learn a model, and then the AI is doing better than a pathologist. So is AI going to replace doctors? Is that the next frontier, right? So that's where we are with AI. And the question that I'd like to ask is, will AI be a panacea or will it be a Pandora's box? So panacea is a cure-all. So it's something that will solve all of the problems of society. And a Pandora's box is exactly the opposite. So it's a box which was opened by Pandora in Greek mythology. And when she opened it, all sorts of problems came into the world as a result of that, right? So she was instructed not to open it, but her curiosity got better of her, and then she opened it. So which one is it? So I'm not the first person to ask this question, whether AI is good or whether AI is bad. So there was this very nice talk that was that's doing the rounds in social media. So you can look at it. It's by Arvind Narayan at Princeton. And he comes to a similar kind of conclusion that there are places where AI is making genuine rapid progress, like face recognition, medical diagnosis, speech recognition, and so forth. But there are also some very dubious claims of AI success. So the AI has been has been used for predicting recidivism. So this is if someone has had a criminal offense and then has gone to jail, if they are let out, will they come back to jail again? Will they do another crime and then come back to jail? AI is used by HR for predicting whether someone will be a good fit to a company, and CVs are routinely being screened by AI. So many of you might actually be losing out opportunities when you're searching for jobs because some imperfect AI is deciding that this specific CV is not a good fit for that company. AI is being used for predicting terrorist risk. It's been used for predicting at-risk kids. So if imagine an AI decides that my kid is at risk for various reasons, then the government might come in and take custody of the kid, right? So there are very sensitive decisions, very personal decisions that AI is being used for, which could affect all our lives, and so we really need to be very careful how we apply AI. So the question, again, will AI be a panacea, a cure-all, or will it be a Pandora's box of different problems? I want to answer this question in these three contexts, right? So in privacy, partisanship, and politics. And the central thing, the one takeaway that I'd like you to get from this talk is that the problems of AI, as well as the solutions that AI will be applied to, will not be for specific problems. It will not be in like silos of solutions or silos of problem areas that it will attack. The opportunities as well as the pitfalls will be at the interface of the AI that's being developed and other parts of a larger system, or other parts of the entire ecosystem, which might even include the humans that are interacting with the computer-based larger system out there. And so this is part of this larger systems thinking, which is you don't just develop solutions as piecemeal approaches. It's that the different solutions need to actually come together and work to solve the overall larger problem. And it's in these interstitial components that you see most of the problems. And this is nothing new to all of us programmers. If you've developed one module in one file, another module in another file, even if it's the same developer developing those two modules, often it's at the interface of those modules that you see these problems. Forget the case where you've got two different developers within the same company, or maybe even a developer who is using an external library, and then the external library makes some changes, and then the interface breaks, and the whole system breaks as a result of that external dependency, right? So it's this dependency in the interstitial where the problem is going to be. And so to talk about this, I'm going to look at each of these in pairs. So I'm going to look at privacy and partisanship, partisanship and politics, politics and privacy, and where the problems might be. I'm going to use my own research as a window into these problems. It's just to give you an illustration, not to say that these are the only problems out there. Okay, so let's talk about privacy and partisanship first. So the problems here are twofold. First is partisanship. So AI is being developed largely by some set of people and some cultures. And the question is whether with that, some cultures are going to be left behind by AI. And the reason why some cultures are going to get left behind is because these cultures which are developing, the contexts in which AI is developing, largely a Western-oriented English-speaking context, does not automatically include the rest of the world, right? So there's a huge amount of data that's needed. And because of the paucity of this data in some other cultures, you don't have the same AI revolution happening there, not at the same pace at least. But the flip side of that is that with large amounts of data, you've got privacy compromises possible as well. So let's look at and see how this might be. And we're going to play you a very short video clip that will hopefully illustrate this in the context of voice recognition, in the context of things like Alexa and Siri that we are used to.
What's the buttons? No, they installed voice recognition technology in this lift. I heard about this. Voice recognition technology in a lift in Scotland. You ever tried voice recognition technology? No. They don't do Scottish accents. 11.
Could you please repeat that?
11. 11. 11. 11.
Could you please repeat that?
11. Whose idea was this? You need to try an American accent. 11. 11. That sounds Irish or American. No, doesn't it? 11. Where in America is that? Dublin?
I'm sorry. Could you please repeat that?
Try an English accent, right? 11. 11. You for the same part of England as Dick Van Dyke? Listen, you're saying smart ass.
Please speak slowly and clearly.
Smart ass. 11.
I'm sorry. Could you please repeat that?
11. If you don't understand the lingo, away back home to your own country.
Right. So, this goes on for a short while longer. So again, you can find the whole video on YouTube. But this should be very familiar to many people, right? So imagine this is somebody who is Scottish trying to use a voice recognition technology and having problems. there are many other accents. So I have, for various reasons, I got a free Google Assistant, Google Home mini thing, and it never works on my accent, right? So it somehow doesn't understand what I'm talking about, and why is this happening? The reason is because this whole voice recognition has been trained for certain accents. So that's why American accents are, even an English accent, a standard English London type of South accent, which is very different from the Scottish accent. If it has possibly got a chance, English accent has a chance, but not the Scottish accent. Forget about Indian accents and various others, right? So AI, the fundamental thesis is that AI needs to serve everyone, and you don't actually have that currently. And the other thing is that AI does not serve everyone, but it serves itself. AI serves the company. So here's again another video clip that gives you a little bit more insight. And this is from Washington Post. And it's interesting because Washington Post is actually now owned by Jeff Bezos, the same person who owns Amazon. So it's very interesting that a reporter of Washington Post is saying this.
Alexa goes off all the time in my house.
Sorry, I don't know that.
That means Amazon has so many recordings of me and my family that I wondered, might it have enough of my voice to create a song? Challenge accepted. This voice is my voice. But first, let's back up. A lot of Echo owners don't realize it, but Amazon keeps every single thing it ever records. You can see it all right here in the Alexa app. It's a walk down memory lane that you never wanted. When I went through mine, there were thousands of recordings. Some are mundane.
Alexa, set timer for 6 minutes.
Some are a little awkward. Giggle. And others are from unexpected house guests.
Alexa, send me a fart.
The craziest part is all of the times it records you when you did not say its wake word. I found dozens and dozens of examples when I went through my Alexa history, like this.
You've lost me.
And random episodes of Downton Abbey.
I'll write after Carson's wedding.
And even this.
Is today fried chicken day?
But wait, why on earth is Amazon keeping all of these recordings? They say they need them to improve their artificial intelligence, which means, believe it or not, that some Amazon employees are listening to your voice to train Alexa. Amazon does let you manually delete recordings, but you can't stop it from storing them in the first place. Something arch rival Google Assistant does let you stop.
Okay, so he's making the point that basically there's a lot of data that's being collected, and data that's being collected outside of the context that it's supposed to be used in. And part of the reason is because Alexa is getting confused. It thinks that you're saying Alexa when you're not saying Alexa, but something that sort of sounds like Alexa. And that's a big problem. So in fact, there was a couple of cases where there was a double murder which was solved because Alexa had by mistake recorded the conversations that happened when that murder actually happened, right? So it can come back and bite you in when very private conversations are actually being recorded without your knowledge. And this is not just Alexa. I just picked Alexa because there was this very nice video from Washington Post that talked about it. Every other major voice recognition solution has the same problem. So Google had a problem when a contractor leaked lots of recordings. Similarly with Apple and Siri. And so in a sense, and it's like very personal conversations, right? So including recordings of users having sex in a very personal and private setting. So these are things that we assume will not be recorded, will not go out of the context, but in fact, this is what technology is doing. So we have an imperfect solution, and we need a way around this. We need an improvement to the solution. So the research challenge here is, can we actually develop AI assistant systems that respect our privacy? And can we also develop systems that we can tweak to our needs, right? So I need a solution. I shouldn't be depending on Alexa or Siri or Google Assistant to solve my problems. Can I solve the problems that I have, my accents, my specific requests by myself? And the sort of approach that we're taking towards this is we can actually build much of the same functionality, much of the same machine learning functionality in-house, in our houses actually, so in our homes specifically, on little computers like Raspberry Pis. Raspberry Pis by themselves are not powerful enough to do most of the machine learning, but there are very innovative hardware solutions like Google has this Google TPU device. Intel actually has a similar thing called Intel NCS, which are geared towards, and NVIDIA has a Jetson Nano, for example, all of which are geared towards doing machine learning very efficiently on very low-powered hardware. So what we are proposing is that we can develop equivalents of what Alexa is doing on the cloud, and do it in our own houses, so that if I wanted an Alexa that is tweaked to my accent, I can do it in my house. And then it can still contact the cloud for information that it does not have. So for example, if I'm asking Alexa, what's the weather? The speech recognition can happen in my house on my Raspberry Pi. The NLP can happen in my house, but the actual weather information is not going to be within my house. So then I go and do a standard Google search, and then the answer comes back, and then the answer can be played out as a voice. So the second question that I'd like to ask is about partisanship and politics, right? So here, unlike in the previous case where AI was actually dividing us, and we didn't want AI to divide us. We didn't want a solution which only worked for the American accents, but not for the Scottish or the Indian accent. Here, we want to prevent divisions from happening, and in fact, AI is being used for dividing us. So AI is being used by in various ways to have targeted ads or ads that are tailored towards individual demographics or individual preferences. And AI is dividing us based on how we vote. So whether I'm a conservative or whether I'm a liberal politician decides what kind of information the AI systems, the social media platforms let us see. So how did this start? So this happened because social media platforms and every other online source is recommending us information. And there is the need to recommend information because there's a huge amount of information. We don't have the time. So we rely on technology to tell us what we should be looking at. And it started off very innocuously, right? So again, it started off with things like Amazon, where they built this thing called collaborative filtering. A very simple solution. If you bought this book, then you might be interested in these other books or these other products, right? So, and here's the original paper describing Amazon's system back in 2002 or 2003. And this is the example they're giving from the Amazon website at that time. So they say, if you bought this book about software requirements, then you're likely to want Star Wars, The Sopranos, The Pragmatic Programmer, and so forth. So, I mean, it makes sense that if I'm interested in software requirements, I might be interested in The Pragmatic Programmer. But why would I be interested in Star Wars? Or why would I be interested in The Sopranos? So there's some sort of cultural embedding, again, that's going on here, which is that in a Western context, in the American context, the same kind of people who are programmers and buying books about software requirements might also be fans of Star Wars, right? So it's not all programmers that like Star Wars. It could be just the Western or the Western white male programmers who are buying software requirement textbooks, also watching Star Wars episodes. So there's an implicit assumption that's been embedded, implicit values that are being embedded into our recommendation systems, which is the root of all this problem. So now it's actually come to divide us. There were these recent research showing how YouTube's algorithms might actually end up radicalizing people. So it starts off with extreme recommendations, which leads to filter bubbles where people who believe the earth is flat are recommended more videos that the earth is flat, or people who believe in radical ideas are then recommended more videos that lead them further towards radicalization, and they might become terrorists as a result of their online exposure. So our differences are essentially being exploited for commerce, and we looked at this in the context of hyper-partisan sites. So these are sites which are extremely partisan. They say they are either very left-leaning or very right-leaning this in the US context. And what we actually show is that there's a distinct difference between the right and the left-leaning websites. The right-leaning websites end up placing a lot many more cookies in your browser, so they're tracking you more. And here you can see an example of this between MSNBC, which is a left-leaning website, and Fox News, which is a very famous website that's very pro-Trump, so right-leaning website in the US context. And you can see the base demographic, you've got fewer cookies, as opposed to if you're a youth, if you're a male, if you're a senior, then you have many more cookies on Fox News as opposed to MSNBC. There's further evidence of this kind of discrimination. Cookie synchronization is a technique that's used to detect your demographics to get more information about you by websites. And I won't go into the details of what cookie synchronization is, but again, you can see a distinct difference. So women have a lot many more cookies synchronizations happening on right-leaning websites. And what's more interesting is that the right-leaning websites end up getting a lot more money for the users on their site. So there is a distinct reason why this is happening. This is happening because there's money, there's online ads and the money that it fuels, right? So that is behind the reason, that's the reason behind why there is such a distinct difference between the right-leaning and left-leaning websites. So the research challenge here is that, how do we detect such partisanship is happening? How do we detect that, the right-leaning people are being treated differently from the left-leaning people? And especially, how do we do this in a multilingual context and in a nation such as India, right? So let's move on with that to the third one, which is about politics and privacy. And the way politics is happening in this age, especially in countries like India, is through information that's being spread on WhatsApp, right? So when you're on WhatsApp and you're getting an information, you don't know where the provenance of that information is. Where did that forward actually come from? Can you really believe it? And can you see whether it's the same information that's being sent to you as to a friend of yours who might have the exact opposite belief than you, right? So how can we protect ourselves when there are these different and biased messages that are being served to us? So as opposed to the second half where we were talking about AI is dividing us, but we should prevent AI from dividing us. Here it's a problem of detection. So how can we detect that we are being treated differently, and then can we actually make use of that? Right? Can we flag that up to the user so that the user is at least aware that they are being treated differently? So this is a paper that we had in ICWSM where we look at various memes that are spreading on an online platform called ShareChat. And so what you can see is the same kind of image is being transformed into different languages. And you can see, this is the classical thing. We were looking at it during the Indian elections of 2019. So you have this classical cartoon where the politician is being very obsequious to the citizen, but right after the election, he just kicks the citizen away, right? And there's the way it's transcending the language barriers is that people are just changing this bit. Okay, so this is before election. This is again before election, but in Hindi and in Punjabi as well. So the problem here, though, is that with this, there can be very, very interesting changes that can happen. So here's one such meme. So it's Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, saying, "Friends, I'm going to be your next Prime Minister. I'm coming." There's a variant of this meme which is also doing the rounds, also on ShareChat, which is, instead of saying "I'm coming," it says "I'm going." So this is obviously somebody who is favorable towards Narendra Modi might send a meme that says this message. Somebody who's opposing Narendra Modi can just change the "ah" here, the Hindi "ah" here. If you just remove this bit, then it becomes "ja," which means go, right? So very, very subtle changes can happen, and we actually do see these kind of changes. So what we need next as a research challenge is how do we detect such changes when there are very, very closely linked images, and then be able to flag that up to the user. So that's a very brief overview of three different challenges that an AI-mediated society will face. So the question that we asked was, will AI really be a panacea that will cure all the problems of today's society, or will it actually create more problems than it solves? And we looked at this in the context of three arenas or contexts where AI really can affect us really, really deeply. Privacy in our own homes in the context of voice recognition, partisanship in online news sites and so forth, and politics, right? So politics is something which can affect entire nations, not just individuals. And as I was saying, the problems as well as the solutions, the opportunities as well as the pitfalls will not be in the AI solutions themselves, in the AI additional information, the new functionalities that AI will enable, but rather in the interface with the larger systems, or the interface with the humans. And maybe it's the humans that don't understand how to use AI, or maybe it's that one part of the system is not using the AI appropriately, or that the AI is not offering the right levers for the system to use. And that's where we will see most of our problems. So the three research challenges we discussed was, how do we protect our privacy? How do we enable individuals as well as communities and entire nations, as I just described, to develop these AI solutions without some companies like Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. I love this acronym. It's called FANG, and probably this was motivated by the fact that FANG makes a good acronym, but it also has this subtle subtext, right? That FANG is something that can come and attack you, and indeed that's sort of what we are seeing. So without us relying completely and giving up our independence to the FANG companies, how do we develop AI solutions on our own at the edge of our networks in our homes? That was the first question. The second question is, how do we prevent AI from dividing us in the guise of recommendations? So because we don't have the time to see everything, we are relying on AI to say, here's the things that you need to see. But then that is creating a huge blinkered approach where we don't see things that we should be seeing. So how do we prevent AI from dividing us? And lastly, in the context of new developments, such as the use of private channels like WhatsApp, how can we actually tell them when humans are dividing us, when our politicians are sending us divided messages saying, Narendra Modi is coming in one context, saying Narendra Modi is going in another context? How do we actually detect such deception using AI as a tool to prevent such problems from happening? So in order to facilitate this kind of research, one thing that we do is we share a lot of data sets. Here are the relevant data sets that we are sharing from those papers that I talked about. And I'd really encourage you to reuse these data sets. We are very happy to share them, very happy to collaborate with you. So get in touch if you're interested in any of these problems. So I think I'll stop there.